Um, my class knows that I don't usually allow recordings of my of our class sections because I want people to feel free to talk, and I do want them to feel free to talk tonight. But tonight they just need to be aware that it might be recorded when they do. You're also expecting, Garnett, as you know, Harold Dutton, Boris Miles, Sean Theory, and Jarvis Johnson is joining us tonight.
Wonderful. That's a lot of us. It's almost a quorum.
Yeah, we don't have an open meetings problem, I don't think. But
no, not at all. Never. No, of course not.
Does the Open Meetings Act even apply to legislators?
Yes, in committees, yes.
In committees, yeah. So, well.
But not just in general, no.
Well, you're not a committee tonight. You are the caucus.
We are wherever we are.
So. Give folks just a few more minutes to gather up. So have you been busy in Austin or?
No, we can't work.
So you guys haven't been able to do any interim charges and stuff like that? I know it's usually-
You can do them by town hall, but the legislature is prohibited from doing virtual meetings.
Really?
So we cannot do interim charges in the same way we would normally do them with full committees and the like. No, we cannot in the House.
So you guys have been just kind of stuck.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. It's interesting. The longer we do this, the less time we need to do it.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, if you think about it, whenever we change speakers, which we obviously are going to do, the interim work from the previous speaker sometimes is just ignored, which is what happened between, for the most part, between Joe Strauss and Dennis Bonin. So I'm not so worried about the fact that we're not doing interim work, in that it kind of starts all over again once whomever is going to be the new speaker gets sworn in, and we organize and committees are created and the like. We still don't know how we're going to operate, because again, we could pass a bill and say we could meet virtually to do some work, but what we don't want to have happen, I think, in most members, we don't want to exclude the public. And that's a challenge with in-person meetings, and keeping everybody safe. So we'll just see how this plays out. But we don't know yet.
I hear you. I hear you. For my class, y'all may not know this, but the Speaker of the Texas House is on his way out. He announced that he wasn't running for re-election, and you all don't have somebody currently in line as the next speaker, right? You haven't met.
No, we have to elect a speaker.
Right. You won't do that until you actually meet in a legislative body after the first of the year, right?
Well, that's when we'll officially elect. A person will become speaker the minute they have 76 pledges. Okay. Plus one more. So that's how that works. The election is before the election.
So are people circulating pledges already, or?
That's happening.
Yeah.
There's what makes this one different is we don't know whether Democrats will be in the majority or Republicans will be in the majority. So that makes it a little different than it has been, at least since 2003.
Yeah, hello, Judge. This is
Hey,
Harold.
Chairman, how are you, sir? Good to see you.
Fine, fine, thanks. How are you?
I am great.
Say hello to my colleague too, Garnet.
What's going on, Harold?
Not much. How are you, man? Good,
I'm making it.
good.
Trying to keep things together.
Sorry,
You
I'm just getting on, but the traffic took me a little bit to get here. But thank you, Judge, for inviting us.
I'm excited to have you with us here. So we'll go ahead and get started, gang. You've been listening to State Representative Garnet Coleman and I chat. Garnet is both an old friend of mine as well as my state representative, and he represents the district where University of Houston sits. Spotlighted on your screen now is Harold Dutton, Representative Harold Dutton. Representative Dutton is a criminal defense lawyer and other lawyer work. He's actually done some work for me, and I've appointed him to handle some cases in my court.
Yeah, thank you, Judge.
And he is the chair of the Texas Legislative Black Caucus. Did I get the name right?
You got it right, Judge. Thank you too. Thank you for all your help too.
Chairman Dutton is one of our longest serving. He is not the longest. That honor goes to Chairwoman Symphonia Thompson.
Well, actually, Tom Craddock is the longest serving. He's the longest serving. Symphonia is second, and I am number 3.
There we go.
and number 5.
And you're number 5?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right. Garnet's number 5.
So we've got a great deal of seniority here on the call. Chairman Dutton represents parts of Northeast Houston, and I think you're the near part of Northeast Houston, and Representative Thompson is a little bit further out. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Representative Thompson, if you'll unmute yourself and wave so folks will see you. I don't know how I can figure.
Oh, I'm unmuted now.
There
How's
you are.
everyone? Yes.
Good. Hello, Symphonia. It's Garnet.
Hi, Garnet. Hi, Harold.
We can hear you, Madam Chair.
Good, good.
So I am still trying to figure out Zoom here. I was hoping that I would be able to spotlight more than one of you, but it escapes my technical capacities. So
Well,
hopefully the
This is
box will
above our
follow you
pay
around.
grade. Yeah, it's above our pay grades too, Judge.
I also see that we have State Representative Jarvis Johnson on the line here. Jarvis, if you'll
Hi,
say something.
Judge. How are you?
Good to see you, sir.
Good, good, good.
Where's
Rep Dutton,
Secretary Johnson?
Thompson,
Hi there, Jarvis.
Rep Coleman. How you guys doing? We
What's up,
don't
man?
often get a chance to be on one call all at the same time, so it's always good when I get a chance to see my colleagues. And while they do have all of the, they have a lot of seniority. I think I've cracked 100. I'm gonna crack 100 this term. Rep Dutton, I'm gonna make it. I think I'm gonna be able to get into the 98.
Well, every journey starts with one step.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Representative Johnson is also a former council member, so he's looked at public policy from a number of different levels. So, and you represent the Acres Home and parts of North Houston. Do I have that right?
District 139. I took the place of the mayor.
There you go. So he's got the 4-4. I see.
I'm sorry, Judge. I can't let you get away with that. It's called the fofo.
Fofo.
I second that.
The woman chiming in there is my colleague from the courthouse, Judge Latasha Lewis. Judge, you're hiding from us.
I am hiding, but you have my beautiful picture, so I'll leave that. But I want to thank the representatives and for their service, and I'm looking forward to hearing their comments. And I chimed in because I grew up in Acres Home, so.
To make sure I say the fofo right, I got it. And I see my Harvard classmate, Senator Boris Miles. Senator, thank you for joining us. If you'll say a few words.
Thank you, Judge. It's good to see you. I'm glad to be amongst my colleagues from the House this evening and look forward to the stimulating questions from your class.
All right, great. So Representative Senator, we've been exploring with my class, and I know Judge Lewis's class has been exploring as well, the First Amendment over the last couple of weeks. And we've been exploring how speech gets regulated, how speech, what speech is happening, why we value speech in this country. And we note that we are living in an unusual time where we have some amazing speech moments happening in our streets all across the country. And some of us have been doing this for a long time, and some of you have been doing it for much longer. And we've seen moments come and go. And I know a number of my students have actually talked about this. Some of this is, it seems like we're talking the same things that we've been talking about for years. So what we're hoping is that you all can tell us what the protest of this last year have meant in terms of what you can do in the legislature. What's different about this time from prior times, and for a number of us, how we can help. And I know you all have banded together and announced some legislation as a caucus. So I'm going to ask Representative Dutton, or Chairperson Dutton, if he'll introduce that for us and then kind of guide us through the rest of you telling us about it.
Well, thank you, Judge. Let me start by, sometimes I think people don't understand how we got here, first of all. I think all of us recognize that police officers do a difficult job. They perform a difficult task. And years ago, much longer than you and I have been around here, people came to the legislatures, and what they did is they said, well, police officers, and this was the outcry, police officers have a difficult job, and sometimes they have to make split decisions in the spur of the moment decisions, more or less. And they have to do that on a split second. And for that, what they'd like to have is certain limits to their liability, or certain ways in which they won't be held responsible. Well, legislatures all throughout the country, and even the federal government, got involved and created statutes that did that. What we find ourselves, where we find ourselves today, we find those laws protecting police officers who engage in bad behavior. Police officers who do things that back when this was created, when these statutes and laws were created, weren't around then. They at least they were happening, I think, more or less, but I don't think they were happening so that people could see it. One of the things that's today that makes it a whole lot different, and different for us in terms of getting people's minds right, is people have cell phones and they can see what's happening. We don't have to tell them anymore. You don't have to, when somebody on television you can see them with their, or on their cell phone, you can see them with their knee on somebody's neck. You don't have to come and try to describe it. And so as a consequence, what we are prepared to do as the Legislative Black Caucus is to change that law so that we don't end up protecting police officers who engage in bad behavior. And so that's what the George Floyd Act is about, is doing those things that will cause police officers to do what we wanted them to do for all the time, and that is engage in conduct that basically protects us all. We can all feel good about it, And so that's kind of the backdrop to all of this. We in the caucus have said certain things, for example, and it's a moving target right now because we're going to be adding certain things and probably taking some things away. But right now where we are is the whole concept of qualified immunity, for example, which limits the ability to sue police officers. That in probably 90% of the cases, when there's a lawsuit filed, and probably more than that, more than 90%, a lawsuit's filed because a police officer engaged in certain conduct. The law protects that conduct such that you don't get to file, you get your case dismissed as a result of having filed, having the law around that says police officers can engage or can do certain things. One of the things we'd like to change, for example, the use of deadly force too, is right now it's based on, and I can say this simply, but it is based on a condition of a reasonable police officer, for example. What would a reasonable police officer have done? Well, who explains that? Police officers. But, and so when you're talking about the use of deadly force, it's my belief personally that the whole standard ought to be one of necessity. That you had, it was necessary for you to use deadly force, and therein becomes a significant number of other factors that now have to be considered. For example, you know, did you have a way out? Were there things you could have done, or did you cause this incident to happen? We have far too many incidents where people are engaging in lawful conduct, and then they make some contact with police officers on the police officer's behalf, and they end up shot and dead. But they started out engaging in a lawful activity, and somehow or another, the police officer decided to do that. I know I'm taking up a whole lot of time, and I'm on my colleagues on here have things they'd like to say, and I would go and invite them to go ahead and say it so that we can kind of move along on this. But I will finally say this: that what we're gonna be up against in the legislature, and this happens all the time, is when you're trying to change a law like this, there are significant numbers of entities and people and individuals, like the police union, for example. I would guess that they will be against almost every change that we would propose because that's been their history. Because most of us in the Legislative Black Caucus for ages, for years, have been proposing legislation to make changes that would have invited a whole different climate here in Texas if those issues had passed, if those measures had passed. But because they didn't pass, we've got this buildup, and now we're kind of face the music. And so that's my take on it, Judge.
So let me just quickly recap a question. I heard that you're going to have qualified immunity, something dealing with that in your bill, and
that's one of the biggest things. We're looking at other things too. For example, police officers who engage in bad conduct in one jurisdiction can get fired and simply go work in another jurisdiction. We'd like to prohibit that, for example. So
if I could, Harold,
sure.
In addition to that, police officers that behave in bad conduct in this state can only be filed with a misdemeanor. Okay, that's all that's available to them, believe it or not. In 2007, after the Chad Holly beating, I filed several bills, one being that to change that to a felony, just like it is if we assault a police officer. And Harold is exactly right. Those bills can't pass, have not been able to pass of recent in the Texas House or the Senate because CLEAT, which is the police union, is one of the strongest unions in the Capitol. My good friend Garnet and Harold and Sonia Thompson, they had some success after the Sandra Bland Act and getting some police brutality and some criminal justice reform there. But for the most part, the state of Texas has been influenced when it comes to police by the police unions. The statewide union is a very powerful and strong union. Also, in the Houston area, we can't determine if a police officer shows a habitual pattern of being a bad officer, because the files the reports that are filed that we would file on them, if they're not found to be guilty and not found to have any kind of validation, that file does not stay in their file at all. And then again, lastly but not least, but it's a big one, we have a police civilian review board that just last month came before City Council in Houston. And they agreed with every allegation for the last 2 years that was made. They have proved the police officers' behavior for the last 2 years. To me, that is a lame duck citizen review board that really is not looking at things, and they don't have subpoena power. That's another problem that we have with that civilian review board. So Judge Kirkland and class, we have a lot of issues that our chairman has talked about. It's a multifaceted issue. And I want you to know, I'm a former police officer. All police officers aren't bad. Keep that in mind. We're trying to put laws in place for the bad ones.
Okay, thank you, Senator. So we're looking at qualified immunity, changing the standard of liability, possibly adding criminal penalties for police misconduct, or increasing police criminal penalties. Chairwoman Thompson, I see you have unmuted yourself.
Oh, yes, I did, but I was waiting to do the Sandra Bland Act, because he's the one that we're depending on getting that part through.
Well,
Garnet.
I think, first of all, that was a group effort, and we made some progress. We built off of what Harold and others had done on racial profiling by adding some more qualifications and data that would show that there was a intent by using race, ethnicity, and different actions that occurred by a police officer at that particular time, and then analyzing those records. They come from all police departments in the state of Texas, and I think that'll take us a long way, but not far enough. We also were able to do something that should have some value internally, but not in the way I agree that Harold said, that someone, a police officer, can you can make a complaint or a compliment. And what's important about that is that information is internal in those records. But if those records are not kept intact, then the police department would never know or could never analyze that data to say we have a bad officer that exists within those ranks. Sinfronia and I both did some work on de-escalation policing, which is extremely important. The way policing is done now, for the most part, is command and control policing. Get over there, sit down, shut up, which isn't the best way for a person and the police officer to interact. It's better if the police officer starts to diminish the incitement of what could become violence, just like what happened in Sandra Bland. Trooper Insignia actually escalated the circumstance to one that included physical circumstances when he threw her to the ground. And if he had used de-escalation policing, the same would apply to George Floyd in the circumstance in Minneapolis, then you wouldn't have to use violence or some kind of knee on the neck in order to create compliance with whatever the officer was asking for. That compliance would come from the interaction between the two, officer and the person detained, and that compliance would be based on interacting with each other in a hospitable way, in a way that has respect, in a way that uses scenario-based training in order to do so. So these are the types of things we were able to put into the Sandra Bland Act that have value from a criminal justice reform point of view. We need to do more. Then there's no doubt about it. There are two things that, and I'll leave it here. One is getting rid of both pretext stops and investigative stops. Some define them differently, but that's the ability for an officer for reasonable suspicion of a crime just to pull you over. And then usually what's asked after that is for a consensual search. And that's where most of the circumstances of violence come into play, is because it's a fishing expedition with no real reason for stops. As a matter of fact, African Americans get stopped almost 2 to 1 over Anglos within the percentage of the population in these types of stops. And when people are searched, it's actually Anglo drivers where more contraband is found than Black or other drivers of color. So these are the things that really create difficulties out in the world, because again, it's reasonable suspicion, which is just like Harold said, and when it comes to police officers, it's reasonable in terms of what a police officer thinks. Well, that's not what you and I think when it comes to stopping someone. Also, we have problems where in Texas, you can arrest someone for a Class C misdemeanor or a traffic violation. And that's what happened to Sandra Bland. She was arrested for not putting on her signal. There were other things in the bill that had to do with how our jails operate, which is really important, because most of us don't know this, but we have people that are jail inmates being killed in our jails by jailers often, more than we would ever know. And these are the least trained. They're not trained the same way peace officers are trained, and that ends up putting that person in a situation where they, for being detained for trial, could end up dead. So I'll stop right there and listen to the rest. So listen to my colleagues.
Mrs. T.
Okay, Judge, thank you so much. And since this is such a huge bill, I'm hoping that we can get all of these parts passed. There are a couple of other things that we're highlighting and hopefully to get through. And that is when a person is being arrested, and if an officer see another officer doing something that is wrong, impairing or injuring the person while they're being detained, that officer has a duty, a responsibility to make sure that officer doesn't violate that person's rights. If that had been in place in Minnesota, George Floyd would have been alive today. And finally, we want to address the George in this act. We want to address unjust convictions based only on uncorroborated information from corrupt cops. It's unfortunate that we have about a huge number, like 10% of the cops, that mars the reputation and the good work of the other 90% of the police officers who are out here trying to do their duty and fulfill their responsibility in the capacity in which they are working. We have cops that have made up stories, lied on people, cause people to be murdered and killed, to be convicted, serve time in prison, in jails, unnecessarily, all based upon trumped up charges. And while I know that we have one officer now who has been charged and is waiting trial, I can remember during the time that I worked doing the criminal cases down at the courthouse, there was a police officer with a nickname called Peanut. And he did that sort of thing. And when they caught him, there were thousands of cases that the district attorney had to go back and dismiss. And people had spent time out of their lives in prison, innocently in prison, time that they could never recapture. And even though some people may have been compensated in some capacities, dollars does not ever compensate for the pricelessness of the time and opportunity that they could have had they not been placed unjustly in prisons or in jails. So we're hoping that while this bill is a huge bill, these are bills that we have collectively been filing. This is nothing new. We just didn't come up with this overnight through any brainstorming. We've been doing this and trying to pass different aspects of these bills for a long period of time, all of us. And it's something that we know it's not our fight time, but time with this, but we know we are true to this. And we want to be true enough to it that we stick to it. And that's what we've been trying to do. Sticking to it to try to get freedom, action done for people, justice. If we want society to act right, the people who we have protecting society should also follow that same rule. Thank you so much, Judge Kirkland.
Thank you, Mrs. T. I saw and wanted to recognize another colleague, another teacher from U of H, Stephanie Bundage, who is teaching this class on Monday nights. Some of her students may be with us as well. So representatives, I wanted y'all to meet Stephanie. Stephanie, wave at the folks, say something so they can see you.
Hello, thank you. Thank you so very much for all of this very, very important work each of you are doing. I couldn't be more thrilled that about the timing in which a lot of these issues are being not only just brought to bear, but re-urged among your fellow colleagues at the Texas Legislature. So I thank you for the history and body of work that you've done to date. And I'm really looking forward to being able to witness what you're able to do this coming session.
Thank you for joining us tonight, Ms. Bundage. Is Kylie with us? Kylie, you sent me a question earlier and I was going to let you lead off with that. If you're here, say something.
Judge, I want to be able to.
Oh, Jarvis, I'm sorry. And I see you, Kylie, so we'll bring you on in a minute. Representative Johnson, please jump in.
Thank you. Let me acknowledge and thank all of my colleagues for the hard work that they do. Our job as legislators is to pass the laws, and that's simply what it is. And what we're doing with the Sandra Bland and the George Floyd Act are simply allowing us to create laws that make it easier, but more thorough when it comes to policing bad police officers. But I want to give a civic opportunity to all of your students, because while we can create the laws that make it easier to arrest these bad cops and to hold these bad cops accountable, they can be indicted, but that's not the end of it. We have to now get convictions. And I think people kind of lose sight of that sometimes, because when you look at what just happened today with the Breonna Taylor case, we know all of the circumstances behind what happened with her. We understand the fact that officers ran into her home and shot up her home, and they simply said that they were defending themselves, but yet they were able to place 3 counts on one particular officer for missing Miss Taylor, but did not indict any of the officers that in fact did hit Miss Taylor. And so when we start talking about what do we need to do, we have to be more engaged to make sure that we are going to be a part of juries, that we can be a part, and we need to make create laws that make it easier for people of color to be on the grand jury, because we have a perception problem here in America when it comes to cops. I believe police officers do have a very, 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 very important job and a difficult job, but oftentimes that difficulty comes from the making of their own hands. Sometimes it simply takes a de-escalation, but yet they escalate situations. But I want to challenge all of your students to make sure that they do become civically engaged. Make sure that you are registered to vote. Make sure that you can become a part of a jury and that you don't pass up that jury summons, because it is the jurors who then oftentimes allow police officers who we know have done wrong. We watched a police officer shoot Tamir Rice within 2 seconds of arriving on the scene and shoot what he thought was a man with a gun, but yet was an 11-year-old boy with a toy gun in a state that was open carry state. So why do we continue to give the benefit of the doubt when we have officers that oftentimes bring trouble when there isn't really any trouble? And we do know that there are circumstances by which race has a lot to do with it. And so, again, the challenge is making sure that we fill those jurors, because when we start talking about, a jury of your peers, we need to make sure that it is very diverse, and oftentimes it's not. And so we have to do a much better job if we want to seek and see justice being served. Then we have to make sure, and it's very common what they do with some of these jurors, and we saw that with the Rodney King trial, where they actually changed the venue and took it to a community that was very police friendly, in a whole nother city. So that's why the challenge goes out: become a part of those juries so that you can make sure that you can help serve justice. But again, I want to thank my colleagues, Ms. T, for the fantastic work of the George Floyd Act and Representative Coleman with the Sandra Bland. But there's certainly far more work to be done, and we hope that we can flip this House in the next legislative session, and then we can actually get many of these laws passed that we need passed in order to be able to serve and provide justice for all of our communities.
So Representative Johnson, thank you so much for that reminder to be civically engaged. And thank you for the plug for jury service on behalf of all the judges down at the courthouse. Thank you. Jury service is both a privilege and honor. Frequently it's fun, but it's also quite necessary if we want to protect our freedoms in this country. So you're wise to bring that up, and I thank you for that. Kylie, I'm going to add you into the mix. You had a question, and we'll start with that.
Okay, do you want me to read a specific question that I sent you today, or do you want me to choose?
The first one you sent me and the first two you sent me were the ones I think would be really good to hear from. So.
Okay, well, I'll start with my first question. I put, does public policy always change because of the protest or frustration of the people? And is it always persuaded by rioting or peaceful protest?
Well, I take a shot at that, and then we can probably, my other colleagues can chime in. It's been my experience over the tenure of my time in office that people pay attention to what people persist at. And protest is one of the mechanisms by which people are able to raise an awareness of an issue that perhaps should be addressed. And the greater the protest, the greater the intensity of that issue getting addressed. And I think protest in that respect has been very helpful. Moreover, I should say that none of us agree with, condone, or advocate, and have not been benefactors of things that have involved violent protests, burning down places and things of that nature, and looting. That's not protest, that's criminal activity, in our opinions. But we believe very strongly in the First Amendment. And I think that when people rise up and they take a stand and stick to that stand, it gets the attention of a lot of people other than politicians. And if you don't believe me, you let that intensity of that protest persist, and even you'll watch a change in the court system, the way that they begin to write their opinion or take stance on different issues before an opinion is written or during the course of an opinion. And you know, we have an expert among us who can verify that, and that's none other than the Honorable Judge Steve Kirkland.
Thank you. Chairman Dutton, I think you're muted.
Unmute myself. I think I've got it now.
There we go.
Thank you, Judge. I just wanted to respond because I was sitting here thinking, I took about 22 kids with me years ago to South Africa. We went to South Africa, but one of the things we did before we went is we read a number of the books on South Africa, read Nelson Mandela's piece on South Africa. And one of the things in answer to the question that reminded me of was the fact that they had been trying to change the apartheid laws, and all over the world we've been trying to change it. But the last domino to fall to change it, where the students got mad. The students got mad when the government decided they were going to teach the students in the Afrikaans language rather than their own native language. And the students waited that morning until their parents all went to work, and then they decided not to go to school, and they started marching in the street. Well, the South African government, if you'll recall, started shooting them. That, as much as anything, was the last domino to fall in the apartheid regime of South Africa. And so sometimes protest, or as Dr. King called it, the voice of the silent, of the hurt, I think that sometimes that what we don't recognize is that's the only way you'll have any real change. Any other change takes place almost in a progressive sense, because it doesn't do it and get to the point where it makes a change at one time. It takes a little bitty tiny step, and it's kind of like one of my friends used to say, it's kind of like cleaning the Statue of Liberty by licking on it. Yes. Yeah, you do it and you keep trying to do it. But these protests, and I agree with Chairwoman Thompson, not the violent riots and things, that sets, I think, the protest back. But you might consider that it is a necessary evil too, because, and let me say this, one of the things that underlies all of this is a change in police attitude and conduct. And people have proposed things like training, better training for police officers, and I agree that they need that. But if you've got a racist police officer who needs training, once he gets training, he'll just be a trained racist police officer.
Police officer, it's true.
Yeah, that's all he's going to be now. And so somehow or another, we have to hold the good police officers accountable for the conduct of the bad police officers, because they're the ones who see it, they're the ones on site with it, and they're the ones who can correct it. Because that peer pressure is the only thing that's gonna get that officer who's a bad officer to straighten up his act or get out of the police department. And that's my take on it.
Thank you, sir. Representative Coleman.
Well, history shows that protest has a lot of value. Doesn't matter what we say, if we go back in the history of the United States of America, it's the founding of this nation that was founded on protest against tyranny. But people had to do something. The same applies with protests against slavery and ending slavery. People had to do something. It applies to Jim Crow and the civil rights movement. People had to do something. It applies to South Africa. You know, Harold's talking about something that was there for decades. And if we go back to Gandhi and nonviolence and in South Africa, to deal with changing what was occurring with people of color in South Africa, Native South Africans, Indians, South Asians. The same applies here, where people just go, enough is enough because of the harm that's done to individuals. Here in the United States of America, Bull Connor's dogs and fire hoses told people a lot. Sinfronia and I are working on a lynching bill. Lynching, you know, that was just seen as something that could not be tolerated. But it does take time for people to, as a whole, say that lynching is a bad thing, or beating up someone who's silently or quietly or non-violently protesting is something that that moves the people along. But it's very important. I mean, I can just think as just me, you know, when I've seen people go out and do things that God, I can't believe someone's doing something that positive, meaning in a protest way. Or I think back to our people who served in the legislature, like Mickey, Craig, and others. I mean, these were people who, just like our current people, you know, we protest too. You know, we understand that not only are we people who hear about folks who want change, we want change too. And we know sometimes the best way for us to get it is to go out in the streets or to do something that it's like go to Ardmore, Oklahoma and break a quorum in the Texas House of Representatives, or collectively stand up against you know, colleagues who are expanding hate as opposed to in creating division among us and among the people in this state and country. So it takes courage too. It takes courage and it takes action. So when we think about speech, speech also includes action. You know, doing something, saying something, not being afraid, and understanding that does make a difference. So I have followed the lead of other people who have gone out and said, look, this can't stand anymore. And I'm like, yeah, I'm with you. You know, whether I was a college student or you know, somebody just working, or whether as a legislator, because that is how change is made. And we have to remember that if you look at most tipping points, whether it's women's right to vote, it was done through protest and tipping it over the line in order to give people the rights that they deserve. And so all of the discussions that we're having about not just what you said, First Amendment and protest, but about the democracy that we live in, I just remember this, you know, we cede a lot of our power to, as individuals, to government, which makes sense, but we keep most of it. And it's our job to make sure that we're using that power that we have to make the change that we need.
Thank you, Representative Coleman. Senator Miles, you want to add something there?
Sure, Judge, thank you for asking. You know, the great Frederick Douglass once said, power doesn't concede unless there's an ask. And when we march through the streets and when we protest, that's making the ask. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to just demand. And I'm proud to serve with a group of people who aren't afraid. And I would challenge you students as well be unafraid, because the only way your generation is going to have the lives that you live and you work hard to expect, is to definitely not be afraid. Challenge yourselves to challenge others. You know, as John Lewis said, get into there's some good bad stuff happening. Okay? Get some good trouble. Get into some good trouble. And that's the only way change comes about. You've got to apply the pressure. You know, if you take a brick and you take a drop of water and you consistently drop a brick, kind of like what Harold was saying, licking the Statue of Liberty, if you drop a drop of water on a brick and just consistently drop it, you'll break through that brick. And that's what we do each and every day as your state legislatures. Please don't believe that we can just take a wand in one session or in one decade, change the history of this country or this world, okay? And you're at the age now where you should be hungry and ready to fight. Hungry and ready to fight. Because as both of my colleagues have already said, you know, it had happened in South Africa. It happened here in America due to civil rights. You are the young voices of tomorrow. You are the young voices of tomorrow. I'd rather listen to you and take your policies back to Austin than some of my senior colleagues, some of my senior citizens. Okay? Some of my senior residents in my community. Because they're gonna affect you. They're gonna affect you. So make your voices heard, get out, get active, make sure you're registered to vote. Look, y'all, let me take a sidebar, Judge Kirkland, if I can, and then I've got to rush off to another one, but I want to take a sidebar real quick.
Go for it.
Understand this if you hadn't heard this yet, students. This voting cycle is going to be the most important vote that this country has ever seen. It's going to change the dynamics of how we live, how our judicial system works, okay, on choices that you get to make each and every day. If you are over the age of 18 or about to be 18, we need each of you. And I'm not saying vote Democrat, I'm not saying vote Republican. I'm just asking you to go vote. History will show this is going to be an important voting cycle. An important voting cycle. There's history right on this Zoom right now. As you look at Representative Sophia Thompson, she may be able to be the first Black female Speaker of the House in the great state of Texas. You're living history. Don't sleep through it. Make sure your name is on the books. Make sure you're accounted for. Make sure your voice is being heard. And if I know Judge Kirkland like I know him, he's going to make sure and ensure that you're being active. Judge, I want to appreciate and say thank you for allowing me to be on this Zoom. I hate that I've got to go, but I'm always available for you and your students and colleagues. I got to get on another one. Love y'all. I got to run.
Take care, Boris.
Thank you so much, Boris. Good to see you.
Thank you. All right. I forgot it.
But you didn't forget about the bricks and the water.
Yeah, I like that. Uh-oh, I'm still on. Am I still on?
You're still on.
Oh, my staff.
Mike, hot Mike.
And tell y'all, keep the faith, keep the fight, as we all should be doing. And together we'll win.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Johnson, you got something you want to add to Kylie's question?
Sure. Well, now that my colleague has left, Senator Miles, while he said he's not telling you to vote, I'm telling you, vote Democrat. Vote Democrat, period. But the question of protest is what Representative Coleman has just pointed out. It is what this country was founded on. And protest has worked in many areas to open the door and to squash the oppression that has oftentimes been given by this country to certain groups. But in today's society, protest is only effective to those that are given the benefit of the doubt. When you have an individual who simply plays football but wanted to silently protest police brutality, that individual, Colin Kaepernick, was castigated. He was demonized. He was cast out of an ability to simply do his job because he silently protested. That's what the First Amendment is all about. And that's what America is all about, is to have the ability to simply express yourself or your displeasure for what you believe may be a problem. And we all know on this call, we all know in this society that police brutality in the Black community is a problem. But on the flip side of that, you had protests when this pandemic first started, when you had militias that armed themselves to the teeth and stormed the Texas Capitol and other capitals across this country to simply demand that they can go get a haircut. And they armed themselves and they drove around but yet when you have Black Lives Matter protesting peacefully, now there may be certain individuals who have taken advantage of the Black Lives Matter protest and have done some thrown bricks or who have become vandals, but that is not the Black Lives Matter movement, nor shall they be, nor should they be blamed for certain individuals' actions. But it's almost become a double standard these days. But that shall never, to all of the young people that are on this call, it shall never discourage you from doing what is your American right to stand
I have a question,
for
sir.
what you believe is right.
I have a question, sir. With the bricks, you know how you said some people were actually taking advantage? Those were actually placed by a lot of cops. Those were actually shown that they were put in those specific areas during the marches. So why are we not charging with cops? Because they're inciting something to begin with. Because I was at the George Floyd and they started gassing us a block away when we did nothing, right as Acevedo's hypocritical ass. You can look up his record from Austin. So I don't trust him because he's always taking pictures and then turning around a block later, we're almost getting gassed at. And they were trying to corral us on Discovery Green. So when are we going to hold them accountable for that? Also, because it's not just.
That's what we're doing as we're talking about holding police officers accountable, making sure, and if you heard my first statement, we can indict police officers every day.
No, I heard that, but we never actually charge them. So
listen, we can charge them, but we have to get them convicted. Being convicted means you have to have a jury made up of individuals like you who are going to stand tall and look at things objectively. And again, my whole comment about this is the subjectivity of how certain people look at certain protesters. To say that Colin Kaepernick was wrong for silently protesting, but yet you don't say that the militias that were storming the Capitol with AR-15s and M16s are wrong, or even any of these other militia groups out here, Babaloo or whatever they're called.
no, but they also hold that the platform is because of veterans. I'm ex-Navy, sir. So when they tell us that they're using us as a platform because we're being disgraced by doing that, no, we fight for those rights, not just for white people, affluent white people. It's for everybody. And it was another veteran who told him to kneel because when someone is hurt, we take a knee. So so are just people of color just, I guess, entertainment? We're not citizens anymore. We're good enough to die for the country, but we're not good enough to be seen as an equal. We're still living a 3/5 rule, pretty much.
That's right. And your anger is the reason why we're going to prevail.
Yes.
Because it takes that kind of emotion in order to move these things across the finish line. You can't do this without love and hate, but you have to have some anger to move it across the finish line. You're encouraging me because it's good to hear that where others say, okay, it's done. We're finished. We're far from finished.
Nope.
Far from finished. And I know we're far from finished because of just what you said. And it takes that to do these things. So thank you for showing your emotion about what happened to you and what's going to continue to happen if we don't stop it. And that gives me a lot of encouragement when it comes to the session, because that's another piece that we have to deal with. So you have been heard. When everyone said we have to lift the voices of the protesters, well, we took that seriously. We're not lifting our voices, we're lifting your voices, because that's the only way this is going to change. We have to hear you and where you come from. And it's the first time that I've heard somebody say, and not for anything, just because of the circumstances we're in, as adamantly as you've said, the way that you were treated when you were protesting for your rights and the rights particularly of people of color. And I appreciate that greatly.
Another thing, because we do go speak to the council's meeting, we go and talk to the commissioners. It isn't until that I say I'm a disabled veteran until this brown girl is even looked at by the representation that we have. The lack of representation that we have is also the reason that we can't do this. The legalization of weed is like another reason why we have so many people of color in jail. You ruin them, like you set them up for failure. Like it's not just like a certain issue, it's all intersectionality. And at the frustrations of the police brutality, because it adds to it, I don't understand. Like I wrote earlier, in the military, 2 months training, I knew not to fire a weapon unless I was shot at because I was going to get consequences. These cops have no accountability. And the little outside agency that they have in Houston, just bureaucratic like tape. There is nothing investigating. Why do we allow police to police them?
So that's why we need the Citizens Review Councils with teeth. And that's part of the legislation that we're going to do with subpoena power. Because if we can't get it done locally, we're going to have to do it at the state level. And the reason that's so important, if there's anyone who should police the police, it's the people. And so that's why that's a very big part of the work that we're doing, because we can't do that, then there is no one. And as Harold said with that sovereign immunity, there is no one to police the police when they do wrong. Because obviously, as Jarvis has said and Harold said, the justice system isn't working in our favor when it comes to punishing people who have violated the law and policy. So I appreciate it more than you would know. Sometimes I sit up and I cry because it's worth crying over. Other times I just get pissed. And so I hear exactly what's your pin?
Perla Kohler?
The pin shows that she's been spotlighted to be on the screen with the rest of you. I found out how to put you all on a screen together.
Oh, okay.
Well, let me add one other thing. You know, if I could. You know, we do all this under the backdrop that we all recognize the need to change outcomes regarding police, but particularly when they interact with an unarmed black male. But the truth of the matter is this, is that we've got a whole system that's screwed up.
Yep.
I mean, we've got a whole system that's screwed up, not just, it shows up in policing more often because somebody dies or somebody gets affected. But the other problem is, you know, if you go to housing, if you go to healthcare, if you go to education, if you go to transportation, you know, you go to all throughout all the elements of this society, you run into the same problem. And I think that doesn't mean we don't have a lot to gain by changing this police conduct. But in one sense, we've got to change the whole system. And you know, again, I'm pleased to participate in the legislature where we get a shot at changing the system because I can tell you when I came to the legislature, it was totally different than it is now, even. For example, back when I came, the members basically didn't have a say. All the power was vested in the speaker and the chairman of committees. And if you were a member, lobbyists didn't even come talk to you. They didn't really come and talk to you because they didn't have to. They went and talked to other people. That system, what I'm saying is the system that allowed all of this to keep going and sort of to be made evident because it was in support of this system. And we have a system in the legislature that's in support of the system too, to some extent, because when you think about the legislature, it doesn't ever make change that's basically revolutionary change. It's more of an evolution when it comes to the legislature. It took us 5 terms, and you're probably too young to remember this, but Judge Kirkland might. It took us 5 terms to change the blue laws in Texas.
Oh, yeah.
You remember that?
I do.
Yeah, because it was said that it was so well talked about that well, if we change that, you know, a whole bunch of people in Texas are going to go to hell. And that song was I mean, every time that bill came up, that was the song, that was the hymn that was sung, and as a consequence, we didn't vote for it. The legislature, I voted against it, but you know, we couldn't change it, and until somebody said, you know, till some of the ministers came to us and said no. And in fact, I think there was one minister who said, Mr. Dutton, you passed this bill, I think we're probably going to have the same number of people going to hell that we had before. And as a consequence, it got changed. But it didn't get changed. It didn't get changed overnight. It took 5 sessions to change it.
So these youngsters may not know what a blue law is.
Yeah, well, the blue law was you couldn't go to the malls and shop on Sunday. You couldn't do that, and the law prohibited you from doing that. And there was a time when some people wanted to challenge the law, and they got arrested for doing so because it was actually against the law.
You couldn't even go to a grocery store and buy a pair of stockings.
No, that's right.
Or either diapers for your baby until
Yes.
12 o'clock.
That's right.
Even if your baby, if you were out of diapers and the baby was pooping everywhere, you couldn't get no diapers. You just had to wait till 1 o'clock.
Yeah, you had to explain
12 o'clock.
Explain to your child the blue laws. Right?
Well, sir, I have a question. You said it took, was it 5 times for the blue law to pass, correct?
Yes.
And there was I forgot, but the sentiment of the phrase was, you know, it takes years for something to change, and then within 72 hours, everything can change. I don't also believe that it's just going to take forever. No, it's the fact that I feel like Americans are very weak. They are not taking as they should right now. A lot of people are very apathetic towards what's going on right now because they're so full of privilege that they don't understand or they don't care about anything else but themselves until it touches them.
Absolutely.
And the fact, another thing that stops progression is I see a lot of people of color in high positions, and I love that. I love seeing that. How do you feel that we have so many racist people in government, and instead of them being fired on the spot for running their mouth, for saying that the things they say, they're asked to resign? How does that not anger that you guys are not able to implement that our superiors, supposedly people that represent us apparently, are able to have that type of?
Well, you gotta recognize one thing: is racism doesn't stop at the Capitol
Oh no,
door.
it doesn't.
I mean, it doesn't stop at the Capitol door. And by that, what I'm simply saying is that there are people who come into the Capitol who sit as the members of the Texas House of Representatives and Texas senators and governors and lieutenant governors, who all come with certain problems in terms of their thinking. I had a conversation, I never will forget, I had a conversation with one representative one time who said to me he didn't think we ought to have TSU and certainly ought to have TSU's law school. And I said, why? He said, well, because it could never be like UT. And I said to him, well, I'll tell you what, if you give UT's law school, TSU's law school money, and give the money from UT law school to TSU's law school, I bet it would be a whole lot different. He said, you know, I just don't think that even if they had all the money in the world, it would be any different. I said, well, what are you saying? And I had this discussion, but I said, what are you saying? Are you saying the people at TSU's law school simply can't learn, they can't do any better? But that's the kind of attitude that some people have without thinking that they are racist, and maybe they aren't empowered enough to understand that it's like I said one time, that when we got 19th of June and the Emancipation Proclamations freed the slaves, we need a bill now to free the white people. Because some of them didn't get freed. Some of them stayed where they were in their thinking. And so, you know, if somebody came up and had the Emancipation Proclamation and told all these people to go, and then some of the other people were standing there wondering, well, why are they going? I mean, you know, I've got this attitude about them, and I didn't change my attitude simply because they became free.
Well, that's another thing that Du Bois said. It was a psychological thing that white people were racist because they needed to feel superior to someone. That's why they fought so hard for slavery, because as long as they were not of color, they were still better. But that's the reason why I'm saying we need to call them out right away. They should not be asked to be resigned. They should be taken, stripped of their job as a public official.
Well, sometimes systems support them. For example, when we have a law and the Supreme Court in Texas decides that a person who is hired in an elective office to do a certain job can decide that my thinking, the way I think, means I don't have to comply with the law. But they don't do that same thing. They don't think that same way with people on the street who are protesting and rioting. But if you're a JP and you don't agree with marrying same-sex people, that's fine with them. That's fine with the system we have now. If you can say, well, no, I don't, you know, that's against my religious philosophy. Well, come on. I mean, the law is the law. And if you choose to be a JP or any other public servant that requires you to follow the law, you ought to be held to the standard of following the law. And you ought not be able to hide behind some made up religious principles that say you get to avoid the law any more than the people who become rioters rather than protesters are breaking in places say, well, you know, I can do that because I don't like the law. And that's what the Legislative Black Caucus is intending to do, is to change the law so that, as you suggest, convicting police officers for engaging in certain conduct, well, the law is structured now such that you can convict them. It's difficult to convict them. And so what has to happen is we have to change the law. And for us, it's not something we're doing overnight. It's something we've been doing for the last 48 years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So let me get the next question on the table here, and I'm going to ask Trey to do that. Trey, you sent me a question about Previous bills on no-knock warrants. So if you want to jump in on that,
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
you're on.
So my question was that, previously on what grounds have bills such as one of the bills that was, I guess, presented in 2019 to restrict no-knock warrants or other previous legislation shot down in general? I know we've mentioned the police's lobbyists have been usually very adamant about shooting them down, but and is there usually other grounds that go into to take reforming these bills to get them to pass, or just in what grounds did they originally get shot down?
Well, I think you first got to recognize this. Every session, there's about 6,000 bills that are introduced. Only about a fourth of them actually pass and become law. And this happens almost every session. And so I will tell you that you have a legislature that's designed to kill bills if you're based on the number of bills that die versus the number of bills that live. And it happens all the time. I mean, that's systemically the way the legislature works. That you don't get to choose to introduce a bill because it's a good idea and expect it to pass.
Chairman, can I ask you to explain to this class, because they may not know, just how often you meet and how long you actually meet?
I didn't understand you, Judge. Say again.
Can you explain how often the legislature in Texas meets and
yes,
how long you meet?
We meet every other year in session, only for 140 days. And while I say it's 140 days, it's actually less than that, because for the first 60 days, we can't hear a bill unless it's an emergency, and the governor is the only one who can determine whether it's an emergency or not. And so for 140 days, constitutionally, we meet in session unless the governor calls a special session, which rarely happens. And so we're one of the last state legislatures that adopts this attitude that the government that governs least governs best. And so that's why the bills that are introduced in one session, when they die, they have to be reintroduced in the next session. And it starts the process all over again. And so you don't just carry over from one session to another.
While you're on this topic, Chairman, if you could you tell us if the governor has been asked or if he's declared the George Floyd Act or the stuff within the George Floyd Act to be an emergency?
Well, let me tell you my experience with the governor. The governor called me and about 2 months ago, and he said, well, he'd like to start discussing how and what we were going to do during the next legislative session in regards to police and police misconduct. And so he talked to me and signed me and the chairwoman of the Criminal Justice Committee, Nicole Collier, who lives in Dallas. And so he started meeting with us, and he met with us twice, and we never met again. And the first time it was more kind of introductory. And the second time I asked the governor, well, what was it he was trying to do? He said to me, he was trying to figure out how to develop something that will pass the legislature in terms of criminal justice and police misconduct. To which I responded, Governor, I think what we ought to be doing is designing something that fixes the problem. Irrespective of whether or not it's going to pass the legislature, because that's not something you or I can determine at this point. Why don't we try to fix the problem? Long story short, he told me at that point to work with his staff. If we had an issue, I could work with his staff, and to which I told him that I'll have my staff call his staff. And that's where we ended it. and he's not, and what he's done, he's gone to several jurisdictions, invited only the Republican members of the legislature to the conference, to the press conference, didn't invite any Democrats, didn't invite any Black members at all, and had, and reached out to the public about several issues. And I think he's following the playbook from the national, you know, from our person in the White House. And he's tending to be more partisan. And I suspect he's going to be one that's, and I hope I'm wrong, but from where I sit, I think he's going to be the person in the way of us getting the George Floyd Act passed.
I agree.
We're going to try to work with him, and we'll do everything we can to work with him because, you know, obviously we got to work with him. But I just don't, I don't think, I think we may have to almost run over him before we get something done that's going to be significant in terms of passage of George Floyd. I even talked to him one point. About, I said to him, I said, Governor, you know, I gave him an example of a bill I had last session. And I said, let me explain to you. We have the law that says, you know, if you're arrested for resisting arrest, they don't have to tell you why you're being arrested in the first place. I said, and I had a bill that all it did is said, you were going to have to disclose to the person who's arrested for resisting arrest only why they were being arrested in the first place. I thought, well, that makes, you know, at first he said he thought that made common sense. And later on he came back and I guess the police officers got to him and he said, well, he didn't think that was necessary. So that's kind of the land of the governor. I don't think he appreciates the problem and the nature of the problem enough to want to help us resolve the problem. I don't know, and some Representative Thompson, Chairwoman Thompson might have a different take on it, but I just don't see him being a person to help us at all.
Well, it's Garnet.
Go ahead, Garnet.
I see it the same way Harold does. Some days the governor thinks he runs the state of Texas, and sometimes we show him he doesn't. And, you know, in the final analysis, if we waited for him to agree with the things that Ms. Thompson and the Black Caucus and Chairman Dutton had put together in the George Floyd Act to move it, we'd be waiting a long time. So we depend on the people that are in your classroom, the people around the state, to help us move this through using the same voices they used to make sure that we did something, because it's going to require that. But you know, it's funny. I keep responding to this question in different ways. Well, does the governor? I'm like, do you think I got on the phone and I asked the governor what he thought? I mean, you know, if we were doing that, it just nothing would ever happen. Right. And so I'm laying out to say, ditto, I agree with Harold. This is a tough situation, but not an impossible situation.
So
and that's the reason why I think that protests are still significant.
That's right.
So we're not going to see emergency action at the beginning of the session. This will happen in the regular session when you all are in more control.
The
Yes.
governor
After
is
the
a
6th of
walking, talking hypocrite. Let me just say that. And let me tell you why I say that. Because when you sit here and you pander to a certain base, now those same militias with guns went out there and stormed the Capitol and said we want to open up businesses to get haircuts, and the governor who acted, you know, like he wasn't the governor, but he said, let's go ahead and reopen businesses. But the hypocrisy of it all is that the state capitol is closed. That's a governor's call. You can't go visit the governor's mansion. That's a governor's call. You couldn't go get a driver's license. That's a governor's call. TxDOT is closed. That's a governor's call. And yet you're trying to force teachers and students to go back to school. You're trying to force churches to reopen. You're trying to do certain things that pander to a base because they're politicizing everything. They politicize Black Lives Matter. They politicize this pandemic, and they're playing with people's lives, and they simply use that as this, well, we're trying to do what's best in the best interest of Texas. And it's the same thing that that person in the White House is doing. He pretends like he's the president sometimes, but then he says, oh, you know, if it wasn't for the Democrats, no, you're the president. Lead by example. Lead by example. Stop saying one thing but doing another. The president wants all these schools to open up. His own son's school is not opening up. I mean, so that's why I say it's a walking, talking hypocrisy with all of that, and it's time out for that. And we have to stop that. And that's why it's so very important, regardless of whether people don't believe in Republican or Democrat or whatever, just look at the facts. The governor wants to open up this state to do business again. Lead by example. Open up the governor's mansion. Open up the state capitol. Ms. T, have you gone to the state capitol? Can you walk through the state capitol? Representative Dutton, Representative Coleman, they have prohibited us from going to the state capitol.
We can't meet.
We're still trying to figure out. We're still trying to figure out if we're going to meet in January.
That's right.
So if the governor was serious, he would have called a special session and said, hey, legislators, let's show them how it's done. Let's demonstrate to the state of Texas that it's safe to send our children back to school. Let's show them that it's safe. Let's reopen our economy, but we have to demonstrate that. He didn't do that. Then why in the world are you trying to tell somebody else to put, you know, it's like Lieutenant Dan, or old people will take a fall for the Dow. Oh yeah, all old people they'll want to put their lives on the line. See, I'm getting frustrated, but you get my point. Hypocrisy is what is hurting this country, is hurting this state, and is driving wedges between all of us. Black Lives Matter can protest, but that is, they're thugs. But militias can storm the state capitol with guns and heavy artillery, and they're just simply exercising their rights.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Chairman Dutton, did you have something you raised your hand there? I don't know if that was.
No. Jarvis got at it, so.
Jarvis took care of it?
They took care of it.
Thank you, Jarvis. We're gonna jump now. Nicole Flores had a question, and it kind of follows along with the political aspect of it. So Nicole, if you will put your face on and come on. Are you there, Nicole?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Are you not able to do video?
No, I look really rough right now. I'm sorry.
All right, well, ask your question for us. You were mentioning some stuff that's going down in Florida, and you wanted to know what's the likelihood it could come here. Is that right?
Yes. I was wondering what y'all thought about Governor Ron DeSantis' violent protest bill that he proposed on Monday.
His what?
What does it do?
His violent protest bill.
So tell them some of the things that's in it, Nicole.
So he listed in his bill that drivers were not liable for any death or injury caused due to fleeing for safety from a mob, and that it is a felony to be at a protest where anyone else at a protest commits a crime.
And all you
Okay, I tell you what I think about it. I think that if the people of this country don't make a change in the White House, then they can see what's going to not only happen in Florida, but probably be duplicated around the country.
Exactly
And
right.
that is the #1 reason why people ought to go out and cast their vote. And I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to be like Jarvis Johnson. They need to cast their vote democratically. for a Democrat.
Amen. Amen. Because I think
That's crazy.
what he's trying to do is say, stop. He's looking at the protest and not looking at what caused the protest in Florida. And as long as you do that, I think all you do is basically put gasoline on a fire. I think that's all you're doing. And doing that, you keep doing that, and you're going to get not only a fire, but an explosion. And I just think that the legislature in Florida, which actually passed the law that sent it to the governor, I mean, I think it's just crazy anyway, because I think, I don't know how they could possibly think that much of it will be ever enforced. I mean,
it is much like what they did in Wisconsin. There's so many people that are defending that 17-year-old boy that drove across state lines with an illegal weapon to defend somebody's property who did not ask him to defend their property. It wasn't his right. No one asked him to come defend my property, but they were looking for a fight. And when you heard the sheriff say, if people would not have violated the curfew, then this may not have happened. Well, if he didn't travel across state lines with an illegal weapon, then this definitely wouldn't have happened. But again, they pick and choose who gets to protest and who these racist governors, sheriff, and any of the others want to decide that Black Lives Matter protests are all violent and they're all anti-American, because racism in America has been so it's in the fabric of who we are. When you speak out against racism, people oftentimes think you're speaking out against America. And that is not what the case is. We're not speaking out against America. We were all born here. We will all say that, you know, we love this country for what it's supposed to be, but it's those individuals who tell me as a Black man that anytime that I protest, that I'm anti-American. But then my colleagues walk around the state capitol with guns and with all of those, you know, marshals that we have there, and they simply say, well, I'm protecting my civil liberties, but I can't protect mine by simply protesting silently, peacefully. But so I'll go back to the perception. We have a perception problem in America. Anytime people protest on behalf of Black men and women for the oppression, there will be those that will then step in and say that you're being racist because you're only because all lives matter. No, the point is everybody, yes, all lives matter. But the point is that when you can shoot a Breonna Taylor while she was sleeping, and the grand jury and the district attorney justifies it, but then you indict the officer that shot through the wall of the apartment next door, where ironically there was a white woman that lived, but they indicted on those 3 bullet holes that went through her wall, but they didn't indict for the bullet holes that went through the ceiling, ironically, where there were a Black family living. So you didn't indict on that, so there was no justice served on that. But then on top of that, you didn't indict the officers that actually killed. She did not fire a weapon at those officers, so why did you not charge them with endangerment? If you want to say they were protecting themselves, she was not a casualty of war. She was not an armed individual that was firing at them as they burst into her establishment or into her domain. So at the very minimum, how can you indict someone for putting a bullet hole through the wall of a citizen that was not hurt or even shot, but then you don't indict on a Black woman that was actually killed? That's when it gets to Black lives. We feel like the police and law enforcement doesn't care, and that's where the whole notion comes from.
Hey, you all, I'm gonna have to get off the line. This has been great, and I really enjoyed being with my colleagues. Judge, can you get us all a copy of this so if we want to put it up on our newsletters, we can do that so people can watch it?
This is being recorded, and I will share a link with you all to, well, I will get it to you somehow.
Yeah, we'll get it. I think it's worth people watching.
Well, we'll be glad to do that. I have 2 more questions in the queue. Representative Coleman, thank you so much for joining us. It's, like I said, it's always a pleasure to see you, and it's always good to.
Same here. It's my honor. This was good.
Good conversation with you. So
Take care, Connor.
yeah.
Take care. See you later, Harold, Sophronia, Jarvis.
Thank you.
You're looking great.
Our next question we got is Jacqueline Pedraza. Jacqueline, you had a question for Representative or Chairwoman Thompson, and I'd ask you to bring that question in. After her, Mahmoud, you had a question that you were working on in the chat, so you'll be next. And then I have a closing one that I would like to share with ask all of you, just to kind of give you what the queue is. So Jacqueline, you're on.
Hello. Yes, so my question was, let me go back to it. How promising is the George Floyd Act from being able to pass this coming year? What is the best way that people can help steer our state towards change in our criminal justice system from years of over-criminalization? And what would be the biggest obstacle in getting the full act passed without removing essential provisions?
Well, thank you for asking that question. It has multiple parts to it. One of the things, the first thing we're going to do is introduce the bill. But what we've been doing in the interim is trying to build various coalitions of persons who have seen the problem, know what the problem is, and who think that there should be something done about the problem in a very positive way. So it's going to take not only an introduction of the bill and the legislators that are working on it, but it's going to take all kinds of stakeholders like yourself, a student, like organizations, like churches, like all kinds of similar groups who understand the thrust of what we're trying to accomplish in being able to make these changes. We're not trying to make changes just for the sake of changes. We're not trying to make changes because we think, well, it's our time to beat up on police officers. We recognize that there are some problems with policies in the police department, and we need to make sure that there are revisions in those policies. We recognize that there's a problem even with accountability. We need to make changes so that just like we as citizens are expected to be accountable to the rules and regulations that govern our society, then persons who work for us are not exempt from being accountable to those same rules and regulations. When you talk about persons who deter the passage of legislation, it is usually groups who have been working toward making sure that there's no change in their organization. And they have friends, just like you do. You know, you have friends that may come and help you accomplish a certain task that you may be tasked to accomplish or to do. You have the District Attorney Association, which is a very strong organization that, because the police department and the district attorney usually work hand in hand, they have to rely upon the work and the skills and the information and investigation of police officers and be able to make cases and things of that nature. You have the Police Officers Association. You have groups that favor certain groups. For example, you know, there may be, let me use this as an example. You have Boy Scout and Girl Scout organizations. There are groups of people who support those organizations to make sure that the children who are participating in the activities of those particular organizations are going to be able to participate and have positive outcomes. So all of those groups have subgroups of people who support the policemen in many in various capacities. And you have those groups to fight against, but we also are building a reservoir of support that we hope that are going to be able to see the essence of what we're trying to do, the essence of the necessity of getting what we're trying to do accomplished, and the essence of knowing that they need to come aboard and help us to be able to create it. Because we have allowed too many persons within our society to weaponize their conduct to the extent that is detrimental to society as a whole.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I noticed how I think it was Representative Coleman mentioned about CLE being one of the strongest unions. So I'm guessing that would be one of those groups that be in the way of passing it, correct?
Absolutely, and you can and listen. That's not a bad thing in this respect. It is it's a statewide police organization that officers belong to. Just like, you may have, you may be a part of a local organization, but there's also a statewide organization of that same organization as a whole. So naturally, when you have things that you believe that work best in your favor, you fight to sustain those things. And, I understand, we understand that. But what we're speaking of, we are speaking about what is in the best interest of the citizen as a whole. That's what we're talking about. Why should we allow bad cops to continue to kill people without any accountability? Why should we have bad cops to trump up charges on citizens, put them in jail, put them in prison, take their time and livelihood away from them and their families, and not be accountable for those sort of things? So what we're saying is, if the rule have to work for me, it should work for you too.
That's true.
Chairman Dutton, do you have anything to add to that?
No, we can go on to the next question.
All right, so Mahmoud's is a little bit off topic, but it's a good one nonetheless. Where are you, Mahmoud?
Here.
There you are. All right.
So we've been talking a little bit about boycotts, about protests, about the First Amendment, and this is a case that I see not a lot of people having familiarity with. Although it was almost passed, I see now through research that it wasn't, that it was thrown out in a court, in a federal court. But it was an anti-boycott bill. So people were being told that if Texas doesn't like the speech that you are saying, that they could ban you from government contracts. And in a couple of really egregious cases, victims of Hurricane Harvey were denied aid until they signed a loyalty pledge not to boycott Israel. And this is just like a really vague, unenforceable rule. I mean, how do you tell somebody what they can or cannot boycott? And it's a nonviolent form of protest. And I mean, it's protected under the First Amendment, but to think that we have politicians in Texas and several other states who are putting the interests of an apartheid state, I mean, Israel is an apartheid state, before the, rights of its citizens, it just kind of shows how corrupt they are. And I just want to see if anybody had opinions on that, if anybody had heard about that. You don't hear about anti-boycott laws every day, so it just seemed really interesting to me that so few people have even heard of it.
So Mahmoud, you had a follow-up question to that about what you should be doing when First Amendment rights are being attacked. And so why don't you?
So my question disappeared, but I think I asked, what can we do when legislators pass anti-democratic laws that violate our First Amendment rights?
Well, let me take a shot at it. I think it's really a complex question that has obviously complex answers. But I think if you go back not too many years ago, when we were doing the anti-boycott legislation on companies dealing with South Africa, for example. And we felt that was the best way to get something accomplished in terms of changing the dynamics that was going on in South Africa. And so it was felt to do that. When it comes to that kind of conduct inside the United States and trying to prohibit people from their right to assemble and right to speak, I think that we've got enough constitutional lawyers around here who would challenge that in a heartbeat almost, because that would be totally unacceptable. Because while somebody may not like it, and the legislature from time to time does pass laws that are determined to be unconstitutional, either in their application or as it relates to a particular person or individual, I still think that, that some people are doing that. That's like what I think the other student asked about Ron DeSantis over in Florida. The law that was passed in Florida recently about boycott and trying to prevent boycotts was essentially some of the same thing. It was out of the same nexus, certainly, where they were trying to govern a certain part of the population's conduct and proscripting you from doing certain things, which I think are all violations of the Constitution. You have the right to do it. But now the only way you perfect those rights is getting a lawyer and going into a courtroom and having a great judge like Judge Steven Kirkland rule on it, because that's the only way to get it done. And I suggest that that's going to be happening more often than not, because I think the Trump administration, and God forbid they should end up having another 4 more years, but if that were to happen, all these judges he's appointed won't be able to sleep at night because they'll have so many cases in front of them. I think they'll begin to think twice about wanting to be a judge, because it won't be nice and easy.
Judge Kirkland, we have within the state of Texas, persons who have been engaged in human trafficking and who are seeking contracts from the state of Texas. If they have been convicted of human trafficking, then we bar them from contracting, having an opportunity to have contracts with the state of Texas. So there are many other areas that where this is. However, I do understand the question that was asked and the chilling effect that Mr. Mahmoud had talked about in that particular situation.
So yeah, the debarment process is deep, complex, and worthy of many other conversations on top of this. The First Amendment aspects of Mahmoud's question was one that attracted me to having this discussion here today. Representative Johnson, did you have anything to add to that?
I think you may be.
The point about Mahmoud, when you said what can we do, all of these legislators are voted in, and so you have to be very boisterous with their base and let their base know, because oftentimes their base listens only to one news source, or they'll only hear one side. And when they do that, then it gets stuck in their minds and they don't hear an alternative voice or opinion. And as you know, their favorite phrases, they'll come up with alternative facts. And so you have to be diligent enough to reach out to their base, to their constituency, because I guarantee you'll know somebody in their community, and spread that information, because the only way that we can get them out is by voting them out. being an elected official.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Before I ask my last question, I want to acknowledge again that Judge Lewis is with us on the Zoom tonight, and Professor Bundage is with us on the Zoom tonight. Both of them have hidden their faces from us for a minute or two here, but I wanted to ask if you all had something you needed to tell your students who may be on the call, or if you had any questions you would like to ask. Don't be shy.
I don't, this is Judge Payne. I've really enjoyed the discussion, and I have really learned a lot. And so I thank the state representatives again for the work that they're doing and will do in the future. And I second jury service, and I second, I tell everyone that's the best part of this job. I'm new to it. Is to watch democracy in action when you see representatives from the community. So participate in justice. So go out there and vote and become a part of an active participant in this democracy, and change will happen. But for my students, thank you for coming to this panel discussion, and I've noted who was here, so as I said I would, and so I hope you enjoyed it as well. Thank you.
Ms. Bundage?
So I talk to my students a lot about the bus stop analogy, right? I'm sure many of you have heard it, that often, our legislative process is, when you think about taking a bus, you take the bus and it almost never drops you off right in front of your house, but you get close, right? Or you get closer every time, and you have to walk fewer blocks to where you're going every time. And so I just want to thank all of you all for the work that you've done to get us closer to our ultimate stop. We will get there, but we know that it is a process, and it takes time. So to my students, thank you for coming. I hope that you all have taken very good notes, because I have offered an extra credit quiz question to thank you and encourage you to attend. So I hope that you learned something and you got incredible information out of it. I reiterate voting, reiterate jury service, and if you have not, please fill out the U.S. Census. Thank you.
So Professor Bundage, if you would share your question with me, my students might see it too.
Okay.
So Representative Dutton, Representative Thompson, we have taken together to the streets many times over our careers. You all more than I have, but we've been there on the streets numerous times. Usually in response to a tragedy that's affected one of our communities or some of our communities, and we've pushed for change, and sometimes we get a little bit. This past year, to me, has felt different. So my question to you is, do you think it's different? And what will that difference mean for us going forward?
Let me answer your question by sharing an experience with you, if I may. During my college years at Texas Southern University, there was a movement called a sit-down strike, where we would go and sit down at lunch counters because we couldn't be served because of our ethnicity. I used to sit on at the lunch counter on the corner of Alameda and Southmore, which was Madding's drugstore, now Walgreens. During that course, between classes, you have an hour or two, I would go and sit down with other students. In my mind at that time, Judge Kirkland, I didn't see, my vision didn't show me that I was going to ever see integration. But I believe that maybe someday my grandchildren, because of my action, would be able to see integration. But lo and behold, the the sit-down strike movement took flight, and it began to move across the country. Martin Luther King got in the march. Reverend Bill Lawson participated right here in Harris County, and it made a change. The vision you have helps you thrust the effort in that capacity to make that vision come true. I not only operate on the limited vision of my own, but I operate on the vision of others. Did we go to jail? A lot of students went to jail. Some students even got killed. And one of the occasions while I was sitting down there on those stools, a white guy came in with a double-barrel shotgun to kill us all. He called us every N-word in the books that you can imagine, and some you probably cannot even imagine. And we did not run, we remained on those stools. And after the ordeal was over with, which lasted about 40 minutes, people who was watching began to pour into the drugstore where we were, and they began to brag on us and tell us how brave they thought we were. And really, Judge, I'm gonna tell you, we were frozen in the fear. We couldn't move if we wanted to move. We were just absolutely frozen there. There were a lot of students, as I mentioned, that got arrested. Garnet Coleman's uncle, Clarence Coleman, was an attorney, and he did pro bono work for those students who got arrested. He went down to the jail, helped to get them bonds, helped to go to court and represented them. But all of us had a vision that someday, if we stuck to it, someday our grandchildren would be able to see integration. But we were able to see integration ourselves. Many of us, shortly after we finished college, it happened. So persistence is important. Vision is really significant here. And being able to gravitate that vision with other people involvement helps to move forward. If we don't do this, we become stagnant, and our country dies and our democracy dies. So it is so important that, you know, we participate and we persist and fight. You know, you remember the hate crime bill I carried. Took me 4 years.
Yep.
But what did we do? We had marches, we had prayer vigils, we got people involved, and we kept pressing on and pressing on and pressing on. And Senator Ellis, who is now Commissioner Ellis today, and I were able to get that bill through. But it didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen because we just tried one time and sat down. We just kept working on that bill, and we were successful. And I just believe that with the help of the good Lord, and we do our part, I know that we just cannot do anything but succeed. And let me make one last thing. Those persons live in District 142, my colleague Harold Dutton is up for re-election. I wish to go and vote for him. Thank you.
That's a paid political announcement.
Yeah, there we are. Representative Johnson, you got something to add to that?
Absolutely. Where there is no vision, people will perish. And Ms. T just pointed out, we have to have vision. We have to have a roadmap to know where we're going. Otherwise, we're just blindly fighting. But as we continue to fight, I want to encourage all of your students, all of the young people that are on this call, that to stand up for what is right. Never waver, never give in, never feel like it's not a worthy cause, or it's just not worth it, or it's, you know, or it's a losing battle. Because I'm sure, as Ms. T believed, that battle that she had to fight was a losing one, but it was still one that was worth fighting. And that's why, you know, the TLBC is working as we speak to come up with an agenda that will address the inequity that Texans face every day, Black Texans face every single day. And what Representative Dutton has already pointed out, that there shall never be in this country a disparity in healthcare, a simple right just to simply be able to go to a doctor to check on an ailment. But there are disparities in healthcare. We know that there are disparities in banking. They'll give me a loan as a Black man every single day for a car or a phone. but it's difficult for me as a Black man to get a banking loan for a business or a home. And those types of discrimination have gone on for years upon years. But that's why it's important that we have an agenda that we can push forward, and we'll know exactly what to fight. We can't fight every battle. We can't kind of blindly start swinging. We have to, this has to be target shooting. We have to make sure that we can pick things off. I love the analogy of Professor Bundage when she said that it's a bus stop. We're going to try to get as close as we can, but we can't get there without everyone helping and pushing us through. And so I appreciate, beyond my colleagues' belief, their knowledge, their institutional knowledge. I've known Miss T since I was, good Lord, I don't know how, maybe 6 years old. Harold Dutton knew me before I was me. He and my father went to school. He and my mother went to school, and I watched the both of them from afar. And now I see what it's all about, and I have learned so much from them, and I thank them. And they've given me that courage to stand up and fight, and they've shown me the pitfalls that lie at that state capitol in order for us to get some of these bills through. So we're going to continue to do that, but it starts with an agenda, and the TLBC is currently working on that. And while it says the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, I want to make it clear that we are fighting for all Texans. We're fighting for all Texans, but we have to stand very strong for those constituents that we represent, that we know have been discriminated against in every facet of life, from criminal justice to banking to healthcare, and that we want to eliminate those inequities. So thank you, Judge Kirkland, for allowing us to come on. It has been very enjoyable. I love talking with young people, love hearing and seeing that fire that they have. And so it keeps the fire going in me. So thank you for what you do and allowing us to be a part of this.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. Chairman Dutton.
Well, let me just say this. I can say amen to what's already been said, but beyond that, let me say that I think I've come to learn that the best time for me to have faith is when I'm right. As Antonia was talking, I was thinking back to the time I graduated high school. I couldn't go to University of Houston. I couldn't go to University of Houston because they didn't take students of color. When I graduated in 1961, I couldn't get there. I couldn't go to university. There were some places in University of Texas I couldn't go. Now, University of Texas had some students, but for some schools, I remember my sister applied to the School of Physical Therapy at University of Texas, and she was older than 3 years older than I was, and she got a scholarship, and then she was denied admission though, because of her color. I remember when I worked at Lamar Coffee Shop, which was right across the street from Foley's, as a busboy. They didn't allow blacks to come in and eat at the time. I remember all those. And why did I bring those up? Because I knew that one day they would change. I knew that one day that wouldn't be the case. I used to ask the cook, who was named Angie, I'll never forget her name. Angie, I said, well, why don't they let black people come in here? And she'd say, Harold, I don't know. You have to go ask, I forgot the lady's name who was the cashier, but she was an Anglo lady. And I said, no, I think she's the reason why we don't let them come in here. So I never go ask, but I remember that. I remember when the students at TSU were going down to Alameda and Southmore, they didn't, when Eldridge Stearns and all of them were going, and me and my friends wanted to go, and they said, no, y'all can't go because y'all act too bad. Because we know y'all not gonna sit down there and do what you're supposed to do because something might happen. I remember all those, but I remember also when I went to work for Conoco, I was the first Black professional they'd ever hired in 1966. I remember that. I remember going to live in a town in Ponca City, Oklahoma, town of about 30,000 people, 500 whom were Black, and then I said 500 whom were Black and me. And then I showed up because Conoco had never hired anybody Black before. And so we've come a long way. I will admit that. And the reason I say that, all that, is because of that. But at the same time, I believe that we have an unfettered duty to make sure that this country lives up to its creed when it says that all men are free. Then we need to make sure that that happens. And we need to make that apply to everybody who looks like us and looks like anybody. If you're in this country, you ought to have freedom. But I figured out this. There's some people who think that if other people get their freedom, it takes away from their freedom. I mean, they think of freedom like an apple pie almost. That if somebody gets a piece, then that's less for them. But that's not the case. What happens is everybody gets free when everybody is free. If somebody's not free, that means you're spending your time trying to keep them enslaved, and that doesn't free you. Then you become a slave also. And so we in the Legislative Black Caucus have decided that our mission is to make sure that the legislature in the state of Texas, as much as we can, at least adheres to the principles that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is something that everybody ought to have. I don't care whether you're a man, child, a man, a woman, or gay or straight, tall or short, or Black or white, or brown, or whatever. That when it comes to the principles in this country, we're going to ensure and make sure that they apply to everybody the same equally. And so I want to thank you for this opportunity for all of us. Tell the students, and I want to say to the students last, like Representative Johnson has said, go out and make some changes. There needs to be a lot of changes. And some people say that, well, y'all have been there so long and nothing has changed. Well, change is not just us being there. You could change us every day and nothing would change. But once you get involved, once you start changing you and you start changing yourself, your circumstances will begin to change, and you change your block, you'd be amazed at what happens. And so, again, thank you for this opportunity, and we certainly look forward to working with you, Judge. And thank you again for me personally for all the things you've done for me. And best of luck to you and your students. Stay safe.
Thank you very much, Chairman. For the rest of you in the meeting, the Zoom meeting, there's a whole bunch of students here that haven't shown themselves. So I'm going to ask everybody to turn on their videos and wave a thank you at Representative Thompson, Representative Dutton, Representative Johnson, as well as wave a thank you to Senator Miles and Representative Coleman. That's right, some of you still hiding, but let's get a good photo going here.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you all too.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, and for my class, well, so that finishes the panel discussion. Thank you all so much for joining us. For my class, we will pick up chapter 4 next week. It's too late to pick it up tonight and keep going. So we'll pick it up next week. at our usual time. And that's all I got for you tonight.
Good night.
Thank
So
you,
no
Representative.
quiz tonight then?
So no quiz tonight. You'll get it next week.
Yay! Thanks for the heads up.
Good
All right.
night.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Professor.
Thank
you.
you.
And thanks for your service.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Appreciate it.
you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
So Matthew, are you still here? Yeah. So you had a question about the speaker spot.
Yes.
So what is the question again? You were asking why?
Yeah. So the whole shakedown with Bonin and like the recording thing, I remember when it first all came out and reading about it, but I never quite understood what happened and why did he actually have to resign? Or he doesn't have to, but why is he choosing to resign? Do you know what happened there?
I don't know the behind the scenes story, but the part of the story that I've been able to glean is that he lost the confidence of the Republican members of the House, which is his base for the number of votes to be there. So once he lost their confidence, he couldn't expect to stay in the position. So rather than have a re-election battle where he gets tossed out, he just opted to step aside and let somebody else step up. I think he also decided not to run for re-election. So that created an election contest down in, I guess it's Pearland's where he's from, right?
It's more the Angleton, southern part of the county.
So it's further down, yeah.
So yeah, maybe a sliver of Albin or so he'll be getting, but yeah.
Yeah, so it was a personal decision on his part not to engage in the battle because it would be a battle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they would have, they would have likely have come after him very strongly in the House, and they certainly would have come after him in his own election. And at some point, when you're in electoral politics, you decide you have a life to live, and you'd rather do that rather than continue to fight the battle.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, Representative Thompson and Dutton have been, fighting the battle for a long time, and so it has cost them, a great deal in their personal lives not to have that freedom to be anonymous or to, not be constantly campaigning or constantly in the trenches. So and I can understand why some people don't want to do it as long or as hard.
Okay.
So that's my understanding is that it was a decision on his part not to further the battle. He wasn't forced out that I know of.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was a good discussion we had in class.
Yeah. We were very fortunate to get them all together to do that. So that's.
How did that happen? Were you planning this a long time ago, trying to get them all?
Well, Garnett is a friend of mine, so I had reached out to him to come talk about the process, and also reached out to Mrs. T at the same time. And she's the one that decided that it would be, or thought that it would be a good idea to bring the whole caucus together to speak to the class. So.
Was that the whole caucus?
No. Sean Theory and Dr. Allen were not with us tonight, and I don't know why they were not. Miss Theory was expected, but I know she's had issues. Her mother she had issues with her mother, so that may have gotten in the way there. And I don't know why Dr. Allen didn't join us. She's also a friend of mine, and we often do things together, but COVID world, and could be she's just not able to.
Yeah.
So. So yeah, it was a good program. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right. So
All right, you have a good day.
I don't recognize any of you, these other boxes here as being my students. I don't know why, if you had questions for me, I'm here, but you'll need to tell me who you are and come on. Matthew, I think that answered your question.
Yes, sir.
All right, so we'll see you next week.
I'll see you. Have a good one.
All right. And